Hi and welcome to my channel Reddit Wing Commander. My name is Charles and I am bringing to you some stories from Reddit. But before we get into these videos, it would be greatly appreciated if you subscribe to the channel, dropped a like on the video if you enjoyed it, and leave a comment below. Doing this will really help me in the future of the channel.
First story. Revenge from Beyond the Grave. Well, beyond retirement, his is not my story. This happened at work to one of the older guys who was just about to retire as I was just joining the company. We were intended to overlap only be a few months. Luckily for me, I worked with him for a couple of years. Background: I worked for a company making test equipment, mostly in the avionics field. We made a test system for an old inertial navigation system. The inertial system tester basically moves the sensor through all three axes in precise order, speeds and combinations, and verifies that it reads correctly. The test system was ancient. I mean really ancient even for the 1980s. It had a magnetic core memory, front panel programming, paper tape loader, and a huge hard disk that was massive, greater than 18 inches, metal plate, but held about 1 kilobit. It was all blinklighten, clicking and whizzy noises, like a futuristic computer from 60s TV shows. Our hero, who we will call Dave, was the only person in the company who knew how this thing really worked, and he had worked on it for decades. The Air Force was replacing the navigation system with a new one, and so the test systems would be scrapped. Dave had less than 2 years to go before retirement, and so he was on a bit of a shaky peg when the project ended. Dave was also a stereotypical engineer, very good at his job, low social skills, and brutally honest. He had made enemies, but because the company needed him for the East and he knew everyone who dealt with the system, from our company to the various air bases and air forces, and civilians who used the system, they tolerated his manner. Dave was often called out to bases around the world to help them diagnose a problem. He was very good at his job, and the air forces respected him for it. Due to the imminent scrapping of the inertial guidance system, Dave was offered early retirement and took it. As the contact was in its dying days, the project store was emptied of stacks of fan fold paper, paper tape, and other bits of useless rubbish. Due to his connections, Dave knew that the replacement system was delayed by a year, and so the East service life was going to be extended. Dave knew this before the company did. Dave also knew that some component suppliers who were contracted to support the East had stopped production and scrapped the old manufacturing kit. This meant that there would be a refurb contract coming to allow the East to use modern discs to replace the obsolete dinnerplate discs. Dave knew this, but Dave retired anyway. That was the malicious compliance. A few weeks later, a contract request came through requesting that we modify the system tester to use a more modern technology, 1.44 megabytes disks, and support the system for another year with options to renew the contract annually. As it was a simple add-on contract, it was agreed with little oversight. Then the panic set in. Nobody knew how to code the system. It was written in Fortran, and a 1960s version at that, and also some machine code for an ancient processor that nobody had ever used. The majority of us had never seen the spider's web that was magnetic core memory. We didn't know where the source code had been archived, and we didn't have a paper tape punching machine asterisk. We eventually found a printout of the source code with some hand-written annotations and had no clue if that was the installed software version or not. Config control department did not give a damn about a 60s-era system that had remained unchanged for over a decade, and they didn't know much about it. But Dave knew. And Dave was waiting for the phone call to ask. Dave agreed to come back part-time as a contractor at a sphincter-puckeringly high hourly rate for the duration of the contract. The contract was extended another 6 months sometime after, taking Dave almost to his retiral date, but with a huge amount of money in his last 18 months. I liked Dave. He taught me a lot. We eventually found an old tape punching machine in a local newspaper of all places. They used the tape to transfer the article text from the reporter's consoles to the compositing machine. Just for the geeks. We replaced the huge disk with a 1.44 megabits disk, basically the same as an Amiga, and a single board computer and some custom electronics, all to pretend that it was an ancient slow disk. Basically, we embedded a computer that was several orders of magnitude more powerful than the host system to pretend to be an ancient slow mechanical drive in a system with a clock rate as slow as a heartbeat. Edit from 1.44 MB to 1.44 megabytes. Because nobody needs a 1.44 millibyte disk. Story 2. Digging ourselves a proverbial hole. This happened about 20 years ago, but I was reminded of it talking to an old colleague recently. This is a bit of a reverse malicious compliance, but it's still pretty funny. I'm being intentionally vague in some points because the sector is quite small and there might be people that can guess specifics. The company I worked for did remedial work on household drainage on behalf of insurance companies and loss adjusters. The general setup was, receive job to do assessment to send results with quote for repair to approval to send out crews to repair. It's a lucrative business and it's pretty much guarantees work, even if the insurers etc. are driving your prices down. We had negotiated with this contract that we were given first opportunity to quote, but we had to conform to the SLAs and rate card. An important note is that it was mandatory for us to quote for all required repairs and there were heavy penalties if they ever had to reassign a contractor after approval. I was involved on the technical side but had my hand in a number of pies. A job comes through for a North London job and as usual we send one of the guys out and we get a call back saying that his drainage camera isn't long enough to investigate the problem. After a bit of investigation, it turns out that this particular house is on what is called a London Red route, which takes around 30% of all traffic and they were specifically designed to have very deep infrastructure to protect from the profound level of vibration that traffic volume causes. We ended up having to send a quote to the loss adjuster to even do an assessment because it required a two-man crew with a whole pile of specialist gear. Our team of assessors look at what was found and it's some form of pipe break that a liner isn't going to resolve it and the resolution is that it needs to be dug out and replaced. It's at this point that we realize that we do not want this job, but we are obligated under our contract to provide a quote and it's the loss adjuster's decision whether to accept it or seek alternative quotes. The quote from memory ended up being heavily inflated because there was so much risk due to where it was, how hard it was to get to, the additional teams it needed, safety concerns, you name it. I don't think it was far off £100,000, which looking at inflation is about $150K now. The next day the loss adjuster calls us fuming saying that this was outrageous and that he was going to take us to the ombudsman and was going to effectively ruin our reputation. He did calm down when we broke down all the necessary steps to do the job, but he was being really RC about the price and trying to get us to significantly reduce the cost. My boss was getting tired of the whole situation and said something to the effect of, "This is the price, you have X working days to accept it, if you don't like it, go to market." My boss then said the immortal words, "We don't want the job, just give it to anyone else that quotes." This obviously ticked off the loss adjuster and he went into malicious compliance mode. The loss adjuster did go to market and got a big fat 0 responses from all the providers after giving them as much detail as he could. He then got back to us and said, "I'm following your order to give you the work as you said to give it to anyone that quotes. Loss adjuster accepts your quote, please proceed with repairs." The aftermath was having to navigate the equivalent of this guide Temporary Traffic Management Handbook, tfl.gov.uk, that takes weeks to organize and redirect most of North London's artery traffic, a whole squad of engineers with breathing apparatus, heavy plant equipment, and a ton of project management etc. In the end it was a very well-run project, and the situation was resolved. This was all done to replace one PVC pipe and we made absolutely zero profit on it, due to the way our rate card worked and the expenses that ended up being involved. We negotiated on the next contract renewal on the right to refuse to quote. TLDR negotiated tight contract, loss adjuster worked contract against us and made us do a very difficult job.